Chapter 1. It was all Malou could do to keep her eyes on the road. The Sunday afternoon traffic didn't help either. She was drifting in and out, thinking of how she would be able to locate her husband, Dan, and bring him back to her. When she arrived home at their beautiful property in Davie, Florida, Malou grabbed Dan's and her travelling cases out of the trunk, fumbled to find her house keys in her purse, and finally opened the front door with a sigh of relief. At least she had made it home in one piece. "Hi, Mum," Gabby, their 17-year-old, yelled from the kitchen, after she had heard the front door close on her mother. "How was your trip?" She stopped and stared when she saw Malou's devastated face. "Mum, what's happened? Where is Dad?" Malou rushed to her daughter and took her in her arms. "I don't know." "What do you mean you don't know?" Gabby queried, pushing herself out of her mother's embrace. "Did he stay with Stefano?" She peered into her eyes. "Come on, Mum, what's going on?" "Where is Daniel?" Malou asked, switching her gaze to the living room. "He'll be back by 6, I'd imagine. I told him I was preparing Dad's favourite eggplant parmigiana." But Malou wasn't listening. She went to sit on the sofa and began crying, bawling her eyes out to be precise. At a loss to know what was happening, Gabby rounded the sofa and sat down beside her mother. Wrapping an arm around her shoulder, she whispered, "It will be okay, Mum. I'm sure everything will be fine," trying to soothe her mother's obvious anguish. "Dad will find his way home." In a jerk, Malou straightened up and shouted, "No!" to her daughter's face. "That's just it, Gabby. Your Dad is lost in time," she added between hiccuping sobs. "He won't be able to find us." "I think you better explain that one, Mum. How could Dad be lost in time?" She pulled a few more tissues from the box on the coffee table and handed it to her mum. "What about Stefano? Did you see him?" Malou nodded. "Does he know that Dad is... does he know what's happened?" "No, of course not. How could he know?" "Okay, Mum," Gabby said, getting up and going back to the kitchen. "I'll get Daniel to come back right now." She picked up her cell phone from the counter and scrolled down to find her brother's number. As soon as he was on the line, she said, "Hey you better get your butt home on the double. I don't care what you're doing." She paused, lifting her gaze to the ceiling in visible exasperation. "I don't care, Daniel," she shouted. "Something's happened to Dad and you need to get home. Is that clear enough for you?" With an arm stretched over the back of the sofa, Malou was watching her daughter. Like her dad, she won't take no for an answer, she thought. "He can be such an idiot at times," Gabby remarked, regaining her seat beside her mum. "He was saying that he was in the middle of some video game or other, and that he couldn't just leave his friend before winning the war, or some such thing." Malou had to smile. "When he'll get here, I think we should call Stefano on Skype, and then you can explain to us what's really going on, okay?" "Yes, I guess that's best," Malou agreed, wiping the tears that were still streaming down her cheeks. A half an hour later, Malou, Daniel and Gabby were looking at the laptop screen from which Stefano was participating in their conversation. "What are you saying, Mum?" Stefano questioned. "That Dad has gone with you to Pahokee, and there you found this old Seminole Indian who sold you a trip to your past for $5. Of all the crazy things to do. And Dad went along with that. I can't believe this." "Yes, Stefano, and your dad was actually keen to go back." "What on earth for?" Daniel interjected. Malou turned her face to him. "Because he wanted to see if he could change anything about his skiing accident." "But Mum," Stefano cut in, "that's insane. No one can change the past even if you tried." "That's probably why your dad went down that slope anyway and relived the accident." "You mean you guys went through the whole thing again?" Gabby asked. "But why?" "In a way, I think your dad thought God would change things for him." "Okay, and what happened next?" Stefano asked, having calmed down a little. "Well, while your dad was in the hospital, we got the visit of a man by the name of Damianos." "Like the Greek Damianos, the tamer?" Daniel interposed. "Exactly. And as in the Greek mythology, this man led us first to find a book that contained the guidelines to our redemption." "Wow. Are you sure you didn't get a sunstroke or something, Mum?" Gabby said, staring at her mother. "No, Gabby. This was all real as your imagination can be." Malou fingered the little amulet hanging from a leather strap around her neck and brought it closer to the screen for Stefano to see. "You see this? This is a dream catcher. It actually catches bad dreams and let good dreams go through. And that's what your dad and I bought from the old Indian. It's some sort of protection against evil, and during our journey, it did in fact protect us from being killed." "But Mum, what I don't understand," Stefano said, "is if everything you went through was in your imagination, how come Dad is not back with you? Didn't you guys wake up from that dream?" "That's just it, Stefano. He did wake up, as you said, but we were still in the past, 13 years ago, and the only thing we forgot to do was to hold hands when he came back to the present. And I was the only one who made it back to today's date." "And what did the old Indian have to say about Dad being lost?" Stefano asked. "He didn't say anything except that Dad must have gone through another portal and found another life somewhere. More than that, I couldn't tell you." What about that Damianos guy? What happened to him? Gabby asked. Before I tell you more about him, I have to tell you that, in reality, he is the cat who was sitting on the windowsill beside the old Seminole. He has powers to transform himself into anything that would guide or tame the spirits in his charge, apparently. Okay, and did you see that cat again when you came back? Daniel queried, quite interested now. Even at 20 years of age, the supernatural always captured his imagination, it seemed. Oh yes, he was there, sitting on the windowsill, when I came back, and I told him that I would be seeing him again. I'm sure he understood me too. Okay, Mum, I'll drive down with the caddy and... No, Stefano, I don't want you to interrupt your... Mum, I love you, but I don't tell you what to do anymore, remember? And I'm sorry, but finding Dad is much more important for all of us than keeping my head in the books right now. I can always go back and retake some of the courses I would have missed, so don't worry about that, okay? During his first night at the shelter, Dan awoke from a nightmare, screaming the name Damianos until his roommate woke up startled. Hey mate, what's the matter with you? Gustavo demanded, after going to Dan's bed and looking down at him. He was drenched in sweat and his eyes seemed unfocused or still lost in his dream. I'm okay, Dan replied a few seconds later, sitting up. Sorry if I woke you, he added, getting out of bed. Did you have a bad dream or something? Gustavo inquired, returning to sit at the edge of his own bunk. Something like that, yeah. Dan was now rummaging through his locker box at the foot of his bed. What did you dream about? I can't really remember, Dan answered evasively while digging every piece of clothing out of his duffel bag. Aha, there you are, he shouted, brandishing an amulet and passing the leather strap around his neck. What's that? Gustavo asked, squinting at the little piece of carved wood when he stepped closer to Dan to examine it under the dim light of the room. That, my friend, is a dream catcher. It protects me from having bad dreams. Neat, Gustavo said. Where did you get it? I can't remember yet, but at least I know what it is and what it's for, Dan replied, replacing his duffel bag into his locker and locking it. How come you remember that little thing, but you can't remember your name? I don't know, Gustavo, but when I do know, you'll probably be the first to know, Dan said, smiling now and returning to slide under the covers. After eating their dinner practically in silence, Daniel asked his mum, Do you remember anything of that trip into your past? Yes, actually, I'm surprised that I remember so many of the places we visited, Malou replied, somewhat vaguely. But then she recalled what she had been told. You will remember all of the places you have seen. The pictures will be locked in your memory. Salangi was right. Who's Salangi? Gabby asked, stopping her hand from grabbing the empty plate in front of her brother and staring at Malou. She is like a guardian angel, Malou replied, switching her gaze from her son to her daughter. She and her husband Damien were watching over us all the time we were performing the 12 tasks. Do you have any way to contact them now? Daniel asked, fingering his napkin to occupy his hands absent-mindedly. Don't be silly, Daniel, Gabby put in, taking the dishes away from the table. Guardian angels don't show themselves, they're just watching over us, like your instincts or your little voice, that's all. Yeah, but if Mum saw these two, maybe they know that Dad has been lost. Well, you might have something there, Daniel, Malou said, because they said that they would be watching us even after we returned home. She paused. But I don't know if there is any way to contact them. She looked up at her daughter. As you said, it's up to them to contact us, or to make us see what we tend to ignore or do not want to recognize. Like premonition, you mean? Daniel suggested. Yes, something like that, so that we don't get into trouble. What about that dream catcher, Mum? Gabby asked, returning to the table with a coffee pot and some cups and saucers. Wouldn't that be a way to contact them? I don't think so, Gabby. These amulets, Malou touched her pendant and looked down at it, are only supposed to catch bad dreams before they get into your mind. But didn't you say they protected you while you were in danger? Daniel argued. I'm sure they did, but Damianos was really the one who was always there to organise each of the dreams or tasks, making sure we came to no harm. Sounds like this Damianos guy played an important part of this whole adventure, didn't he? And you know, the funny thing was, Malou went on, your dad thought he was really evil at first, but in the end he began to trust him. We both did. But if he's that cat in Pakoki and he can actually talk, couldn't we go and see him when Stefano gets here tomorrow? Yes, Daniel, I think that would be the first thing we should do. But let's see what your brother has to say about all this before we start anything, okay?